Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Cannabidiol in the Medical Care Toolbox of Practitioners to Treat Patients. Where are we today? This is the first session of a science-led webinar series called New Frontiers for Cannabinoids in Therapeutic Applications, brought to you by DSM in partnership with Brains Bioceutical. Each session is building on the latest science on cannabinoids. These are exciting times for cannabinoid researchers inspired by the purpose of using scientific knowledge to foster medical innovation. The endocannabinoid system has emerged as an important modulatory system in human body over the last decades. Science on the beneficial role of CBD in a variety of therapeutic areas is gaining attention within the medical community. This first session will discuss latest science on CBD in medical use, building on knowledge about the endocannabinoid system. It will also deal with novel avenues for treatment, taking a research as well as a patient perspective. We are honored to be joined by great experts in the field. Today, in order of presenting, Dr. Dedi Meiri, who is Associate Professor at the Faculty of Biology at the Technion in Israel and a member of the Technion Integrated Cancer Center. Presently, his lab investigates the therapeutic potential of phytocannabinoids with focus on diverse diseases like epilepsy and cancer. Dr. Meiri collaborates with multiple stakeholders across sectors for the purpose of revolutionizing cannabis treatment. He's also operating the Cannabis Database project, and his lab is currently involved in several preclinical and clinical trials in areas such as colon disease, pain prevention, cancer, and epilepsy. Renata Heusser Jungman is a founding member and the chair of the Dravet Syndrome Patient Organization in Switzerland. Dravet syndrome is a rare, drug-resistant form of epilepsy. She studied food science at the ETH in Zurich, where she is currently also project manager at the School for Continuing Education. Her son Romeo, born in Buenos Aires, was diagnosed with Dravet syndrome at the age of 2. Renata Heusser Jungman lives in Zurich with her husband and has 2 children. In 2017, she was awarded with the Swiss EPA award for her commitment. Terry O'Regan is the president of Brains Bioceutical, global leader in GMP-certified production of naturally sourced active pharmaceutical ingredients. Brains is one of the only plant-based cannabinoid API manufacturers in commercial production today, and is involved in academic and clinical trials across the globe. Terry will join us towards the end of the session for the Q&A part of this webinar. And my name is Alejandro Betancor, Portfolio Director for Pharmaceuticals and Medical Nutrition at DSM Nutritional Products. Also having the pleasure to lead DSM's ongoing innovation program on cannabinoids. And now I am pleased to give the word to Dr. Dedi Meiri, followed by the personal and moving story of Renata Heusser Jungman and her son. And then a short panel discussion to close this first session will follow. Thank you very much for joining today.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining me to this seminar. My name is Dedi Meiri, and I am a professor at the Technion, the Technology Institute in Israel. Sorry. I'm running the laboratory of the cancer biology and cannabinoid research. And in the last 7 years, my group is focusing on the research on a unique plant, which is, of course, the cannabis. So my background is from plant biology. I did a PhD in molecular and genetic plant biology, and then I moved to Canada where I did a postdoc on a cancer research. And when I came back to Israel, I want to create a heterogenic lab or multidisciplinary lab when I'm using medicinal plant to see how they affect cancers. And I started to work with one of the plants that I started to work with cannabis. And from the beginning, I was surprised to learn, first of all, that cannabis is the oldest plant that we know that human beings use in agriculture. It's very, very surprising to learn that this is not wheat and not cucumber. Actually, the oldest plant that we know that people use in agriculture and also as a medicinal plant was cannabis. Actually, until 1937, more than 100 medicine were prepared for different illnesses from cannabis sativa. Actually, pharma companies use cannabis as a medicine even before it was forbidden. And cannabis for thousands of years was a major medicine for human beings. The Egyptian buried their mummies with cannabis because it was a saint and was a very important medicinal they use it as a medicine. It was very important for them. It appears 7 times in the Bible. The Indian called it the holy plant. And all of this because cannabis used for thousands of years as a medicine. We are not actually discovering the wheel here, saying that cannabis is very effective. So why cannabis is so unique? Cannabis is a plant that we are using the flowers from this plant. You can see here in this picture that on the flowers on the plant, there are small hairs, we call them trichomes. And in this base of these trichomes, there is specific cell that produce specific compound that we call them phytocannabinoids. So cannabis, there are other plants that produce phytocannabinoids, but cannabis produces them in thousands of times higher than other plants. And probably it's because people are using it for 10,000 years already and push it to be, to express these molecules in high levels. Probably it's because breeding cannabis is not a native plant anymore. It was bred for thousands of years and became a plant that produces specific molecules in high level. It's a little bit, we can think about it how a dog, a poodle, looks when it came from a wolf in the initial. You know, people breed it and breed it to be more cute and more friendly. And we got types of dogs that are far from the nature of what they came from. So I think that cannabis is a little bit similar. It's a plant that people use it for thousands of years and breed it in a way that they can use it for medicine. And why these molecules are so unique? They are so unique because actually, when we look on plants, they are very rare. But when we're moving to humans or in animal in general, all animals produce these molecules. Actually, except insects, all animals produce these molecules, and this is including humans and mammalians. And we actually have an endocannabinoid system in our body. And this system, it's very, very complicated system. We don't know about it enough, but we know that actually every cell in our body harboring the endocannabinoid system produce ligands that we call them endocannabinoids, and there are receptors for these endocannabinoids. The endocannabinoid system is actually a homeostatic system in our body. It's balancing other systems. Take a look what two very senior scientists from the NIH wrote already in 2013. They wrote, modulation of the endocannabinoids activity may have therapeutic potential in almost all diseases affecting humans. This is crazy. They claiming that actually almost all diseases can be affected by cannabis. And why that? Or being, the endocannabinoids modulate them. And why that? Because the endocannabinoid is kind of a moderate system that sits near other system and fine tune it, bring it to balance. I can give now examples for hours, but I will go with few examples. How we feel appetite. If we're not eating for, let's say, 2 days or 1 day, our intestine is shrinking and create hormones that going to the brain and create hunger. this is a very severe hunger. You know, our body need energy in order to work. And when this other energy is starting to run down, we don't have the food, we are not eating, it creates a severe action to feel hunger. So the intestine is shrinking, create hormones and going to the brain that we will be very hungry, we will be angry, we will focus just on eating. Everything will look to us tasty. We will be very, very, very focusing on eating, and this is a severe action. On the other hand, near that, there is the endocannabinoid system that create hunger, create appetite in very moderate way. When we are moving near a dish or near we're smelling a barbecue, small molecules entering to our nose, going to our olfactory system, that's signaling to a neuron to produce a specific endocannabinoid. Then binding receptors send a signal to our pancreas to create insulin, and there is a feedback loop that increases our appetite. This is the reason that when we're smelling a dish, we're feeling appetite. This is the reason when we finish to eat a big meal, we are not hungry at all, but the dessert is coming, we are still have an appetite to eat that. So this is a very moderate way. We can control it. We can say, you know, I'm too fat, I won't eat this cake. But if we wanted to eat for 2 days, we probably couldn't control that. I will give another example, how we feel pain. If we have a severe injury, our body will create opioids. And there is a big penalty of create opioids. There is a reduction in blood pressure and the heart beating, in the level of the oxygen. The body understands that there is a severe pain and severe wound, and he create the opioid, he operate the opioid system to control it and to survive. But this is a very severe action for the body. Near that, there is the endocannabinoid system. When I'm hitting my hand, I'm feeling pain for few seconds. And the reason that there are cells near the nerves that will produce a specific endocannabinoid that will bind these nerves and reduce the feeling of the pain. This is very locally, very fast. These molecules are acting very, very fast, have a half-life of a few minutes, and it's a very complicated system. Usually people know majorly two endocannabinoids named anandamide and 2-EG, but actually today in the blood samples, my lab can analyze more than 150 endocannabinoids for blood samples. There are more than 40 receptors for the endocannabinoid system. Usually people know just CB1, CB2, but there are many receptors. And this is being controlled in a very, very fine-tuned, very, very controlled way, how the body in every tissue, in every action, use the endocannabinoids to fine-tune the severe action to bring them to the right place. So the endocannabinoid system control our immune system, how we feel sleep, how we feel appetite, how we feel pain, our mood, and so on and so on. And for that reason, cannabis is affecting so many actions. So actually the endocannabinoid system, it's a signal between cells. One cell sends a signal to the other cell. The first cell have a ligand that we call it endocannabinoid. And this ligand will bind the receptors and send the signal. Cannabis is just mimicking that. He's producing similar compound that will bind the receptors and send the signal. So if usually we will smell a barbecue that will release from these cells an endocannabinoid that bind these receptors and increase appetite, when we're using cannabis, one of the molecule will bind the receptor and send this signal. We called it in the the stoners world munchies. Everybody knows that when you're smoking cannabis, you can eat everything and everything is tasty for you. So it's increased appetite. And cannabis is doing that more and more. But the problem that when we are smelling barbecue, a specific neuron produces specific endocannabinoid that binding specific receptor. when we're using cannabis, a lot of molecules enter into our body, operate different receptors, and we're getting a very complicated action. It's not a synergism because we have agonists and antagonists, and we can have molecules blocking the receptors and molecules that activating the receptors, and it can be a competition. It's a very complicated, and I won't go in this seminar to this depth. But if to make it more complicated, cannabis is a generic name to hundreds of different species. Actually, in my lab, I have more than 1,000 different types of cannabis. And every cannabis, every genetic or every chemovar will contain different combinations of molecules. So it's a very complicated. So what we did in my lab, we first of all create a library of these phytocannabinoids for the plant. So actually we're the first one to isolate and to analyze all the phytocannabinoids for the plant. So we can analyze more than 10 different families from the plant, altogether more than 140 phytocannabinoids. There are other active molecules in the plant. So if we are smoking cannabis or using extract, we can have dozens of phytocannabinoids, but also terpenoids that we analyze and have the ability to analyze also, and also other molecules called flavonoids. So this is a very, very complicated. When we're using cannabis, we are a lot of active compounds entering to our body, and we still far from understanding which combination is affecting which type. So to make it more easy, how we will say that, the physicians or the way we're treating patient and the healthcare divide these types of plants, these types of cannabis in three categories. Actually, Professor Ethan Russo published a paper in 2006. They divide them to three groups. They said type 1 is plant with high THC. THC is the molecule, the most psychoactive molecule, the one that creates the feeling of the high. So the plant that with high THC, we call them type 1. Plant that have high CBD, which is another molecule, but it's not psychoactive. Actually, to say that it's not psychoactive, it's not accurate. It's less hallucinogenic drug. It's less cause you the feeling of the high. And for that reason, it's less affecting us in that term. So other type of plants, we call them high CBD. And the third type is the type that have equal amount of THC and CBD. So today I will focus on one molecule, very important one, and it's the CBD molecule. So we have plants with high CBD, which is the main phytocannabinoids, but we can also isolate the CBD. Actually, in 1964, Professor Rafi Meshulam, the first phytocannabinoid that was isolated was the CBD. And we know that the CBD affecting our systems in the body very powerfully. It can affect the immune system, how we feel sleep. It can affect pain. One of the major things that we learn about CBD is that CBD can affect epilepsy. It can reduce seizures. It's binding a receptors, probably called TRPV1, and affecting calcium flux. And for that reason, reduce epilepsy. Actually, in 1985, Rafi Meshulam did a real clinical trials on 22 patients and showed that cannabis can reduce seizures. But cannabis and CBD becomes very famous because of this girl. This girl, Charlotte Phoebe, born in 2006, and from age 3 months, she started to have a lot of seizures, more than 300 seizures a week, so more than 50 seizures a month. When she was 5, she started to use high CBD strain that actually called hippies disappointment, because when hippies smoke it, they didn't feel any high because it's a high CBD strain. Today, this strain called Charlotte Web on behalf of this girl. So when Charlotte Phoebe started to use this strain, it reduces seizure totally to 1 a week or 1 a month. And it became very famous because of this child. And in Israel, we're treating patients from 2012, a patient with epileptic kids with cannabis. Actually, Israel is kind of a semi-social, so we all have insurance for healthcare, and we're not paying for the physicians, or we're not paying for the treatment. It's been deducted from our salary, and we don't have a direct payment. And cannabis is under healthcare in Israel from 2007. So a patient a child that coming to his pediatrician with seizures in Israel, we have 7 groups of medicines that this child can get. The physician will check this child and will give him the first drug that he think it can help him. And the possibility that the first drug will reduce the seizures is around 47%. If the first one drug is not helping, he will try the other drug that he have on the shelf. And the possibility that these drugs will help the child is 75%. Actually, we left with 25% of the kids with our not response. These kids in Israel can get cannabis with high CBD or pure CBD to treat the seizures. So kids that tried all the medicines that we can give them, and they are not response, can get cannabis. And we have them these under 2 clinical trials, but also as a general population. We have in Israel more than 2,000 kids that getting cannabis with 37% success. So the meaning that 37% of the kids that was non-response to all other drugs reduce more than 75% of their seizures, which is phenomenal on these kids that we didn't have any treatment to give them. Part of them, 9%, are seizure-free. So kids with 50 seizures a day that are non-response to all of the drugs, taking cannabis, which is not psychoactive, mainly CBD, and they are seizure-free, which is, to my opinion, kind of crazy. So we took it to the lab and we test that, and we see that it's really affecting the epilepsy and the seizures, and we're trying to understand the mechanism. But what we are learning that when we're using strains of high CBD, there are strains that working better and strains that working less good, even though we are calculating the amount of the CBD in each one of them and give the same amount to the mice. So we are learning from that it might be that there are other compounds in the cannabis that cause the CBD to work better. In the few minutes that left, I want to tell you another story about high CBD. So in my lab, we're doing database on the patients in Israel. Today in Israel, we have 105,000 patients that getting cannabis for different indications, epilepsy, but also for reduced pain, for PTSD and other indications. And we create a database on this patient. So every plant materials, every cannabis that's being picked in Israel and can reach the patient is coming first to my lab. We're doing full analysis for all the phytocannabinoid, terpenoids, and flavonoids, and we have a fingerprint to every product that the patient can get. Patient in Israel getting cannabis under prescription of physician and getting that in the pharmacy with a prescription. So we can follow up on the patient. We know what are the products that the patient gets, and we can follow up on the patient. And we saw that there are epileptic kids that getting cannabis, but these kids are also suffering from autism. And we saw that specific strain with high CBD reduce anxiety and violence in these autistic kids. And again, these kids are getting cannabis without THC, so without the psychoactive materials of the cannabis. So they are not stoned, it's not a sedation, but we still saw a huge change in the kids' behavior, reducing the anxiety, reducing violence, more concentrate. So we started in clinical trials on 180 kids, autistic kids, with different strains with high CBD, and we saw a phenomenal results. Look on that, the average of more than 82% of the kids show huge improvement in self-injuries, aggressive behavior, attack to others, concentration. But one of the results that we saw that was surprising, that we saw that it's working mainly on male boys and not girls. Look on that. Reduce bad habits, improvement in 53% in the male, 0 in females. Repetitive movements, improve 48% in males and just 9% in female. Eye contact, improve 47% in male, 0 in female, and I can go on and on. The bottom line, what we saw, we saw that cannabis is really helping on this for these skills. Again, this is a clinical trial with placebo and everything. But what we learned from that there are strains with high CBD, that 100% of the kids that took them show improvement in the parameters that we test. And there are strains, even though there is the same amount of CBD, all of them worked on the kids, but with a lower percentage. So again, we are assuming that on top of the CBD, there are other compounds that help the CBD to work. And what we're doing in my lab today is trying to isolate this compound and learn the mechanism of action. So we can analyze all the phytocannabinoids in these strains. We can know the expression of these phytocannabinoids in this strain and that strain. This strain is working better than this one, and we can start to understand what are the difference between strain number 1 to strain number 2. Even though they have the same amount of CBD and the same amount of THC, they're acting different. So because my time ran out, I can still speak here for hours and tell you a lot about cannabis. I just want to say that cannabis is kind of an orchestra of molecules that working together with a huge potential to affect many diseases, many illnesses. And I think that today we're isolating one compound as the CBD and see improvement. But what I see in my lab, that a combination of molecules sometimes working even way better. And today, with computers, bioinformatics, the analytical tools, I think we will see in the future more and more drugs which are more complicated and with more than one molecule. And in general, on cannabis, I think that in the next few years, we will see two parts of cannabis drugs. We will see drugs which is 1 molecule, 2 molecules, 3 molecules, very specific on the FDA route that can treat a specific illness. But because cannabis is affecting so many systems in our body, affecting how we feel sleep, appetite, pain, blood pressure, glucose in the blood, and so on, many patients using cannabis as a treatment to wellness, to improve quality of life. They suffering a little bit from pain, a little bit from mood, they can't sleep, and so on. Think about elderly people. Think about people that suffering from PTSD. Think about people with cancers that getting cannabis. People with cancer that getting chemotherapy. Cannabis is a little bit helping on sleep, a little bit improving appetite, a little bit reduce pain, a little bit change the mood, and all together is treating wellness and improving quality of life. So I think from one hand, we will find and define specific molecules that affecting specific diseases. On the other hand, I think that cannabis will stay also as a whole extract to improve quality of life. Instead of taking 5 different pills, people will use cannabis as a whole treatment. So by that, my time totally ran out. I want to say a big thanks to my amazing lab that doing all this work. I also have a company called Cannabidiol, and part of the results that you saw today was done and helped by Cannabidiol, and this is the reason I mentioned it. So this is all my group together. Thank you very much. If you have any types of question, you can reach me. Again, my name is Dedi Meiri from the Technion. You can try to look in Google, and I'm sure it will be easy to find me. Thank you very much, and good luck.
Hi, everybody. My name is Renata Heusser. I am mother to a 13-year-old child with Dravet syndrome. I am founding member and chair of the Swiss Dravet-Syndrome Association, and my background, I have studied food engineering at ETH in Zurich, Switzerland. Our older son was born in 2008 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He had his first seizure at the age of 8 months only. He had 4 status epilepticus, a life-threatening seizure lasting more than 20 minutes. And at the age of 2.5, by then we lived in Switzerland, he was finally diagnosed with Dravet syndrome. In his early years, he was also very pattern sensitive. That's to say, he had seizures when looking at stripes or dots. And there were times when even a pair of jeans could provoke a seizure. Until today, he suffered around 1,000 tonic-clonic seizures. What is Dravet syndrome? Dravet syndrome is a rare and severe neurological disorder. It is also called epileptic syndrome. The first seizure occurs in the first year of life of an initially healthy baby. Children with Dravet syndrome have delayed motor development, and unfortunately, prognosis for mental development is poor in most of the cases. The disease is therapy resistant, also called refractory, and this is a challenge for doctors and for parents. 1 out of 22,000 children are affected, and seizures often last particularly long, more than 5 minutes, so many times the ambulance has to be called. Children with Dravet syndrome have very different types of seizures, and in over 80% of the children, a mutation on the SCN1A gene is found. Seizures also, they last into adulthood, and because Dravet syndrome is fairly new, it was discovered about 40 years ago, it is estimated that only 70% have no diagnosis or an incorrect diagnosis, so only 30% have a correct diagnosis. What about the comorbidities? There are a lot. There is a high risk of status epilepticus, especially in early childhood. Status epilepticus is a seizure lasting more than 10 or 20 minutes. This depends on the definition. The mortality rate is quite high, with about 20%. Children have behavioral problems. Their speech development is delayed. They have attention deficit disorder. Their gait is unstable. Most of them have ataxia. Their muscle tonus is very low. It's called hypotonia. They have motor and balance problems and also orthopedic problems. And many of them have chronic infections. On top of this, as usually they are on polytherapy, they suffer from side effects of their daily medication. Apart from special school, children have speech therapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, hippotherapy, and sometimes special forms of nutrition. Almost 10 years ago, in 2012, I founded the Swiss Dravet-Syndrome Patient Organization together with other parents. What are our goals? We want to improve the quality of life of children and adults with Dravet syndrome through funding of medical research, raising awareness, and we provide support to people affected by Dravet syndrome in Switzerland. The families, the caregivers, but also teachers and therapists, they come to us with questions. There is a medical advisory board at our side with 7 physicians. We have adult neurologists, neuropediatricians, and a geneticist. My son has been taking anti-epileptic drugs since the age of 10 months, almost his entire life. We don't know how much they help him and how much they also do harm. They do help, but yeah. He has had 9 different anti-epileptic drugs so far. Currently, he's taking 5 daily, but he still has around 10 to 20 seizures a month. He also takes vitamins and mineral supplements, as well as carnitine, an important amino acid to protect his liver. Although, or because of my son's condition is refractory, we are constantly looking for a better drug therapy. We would like to reduce his seizures. We would love to have him without any seizures. The seizure situation and the mental development are far from satisfactory. And to be realistic, the cure for Dravet syndrome is still far away. If an eventual gene therapy will be applicable to adolescents and adults is also unknown. And as parents, we do everything to improve seizure and development situation. In early 2013, I attended the first conference on medical cannabis held at the University Hospital in Bern. This was organized by the Swiss Society of Medical Cannabis. There I learned about human endocannabinoid system and how medical cannabis could potentially help my son. I started to gather information about possible preparations for my son and even explored if a product could be imported from the US. As you know, for decades cannabis was reduced to the intoxicating ingredient THC and stigmatized and criminalized accordingly. This changed when the CNN report Weed was broadcasted. Marijuana stops child's severe seizures, where Charlotte Figi with Dravet syndrome inspired a worldwide CBD movement. That was in 2013. So in the last 8 years, medical cannabis became more and more accepted and has been legalized in many countries, and CBD became rather popular, probably also thanks to the media. In 2013, no plant-based CBD product was available in our country. In Switzerland, a doctor can prescribe medicines containing cannabis as so-called magisterial prescriptions, so pharmacies produce their own local magistral recipe. But the products available were not comparable to one another. One producer used synthetic, the other one plant-based CBD, and dosages were also very different. It was like comparing apples and oranges. Data, respectively clinical studies, were lacking, so finding a doctor and convincing our son's neurologist to go on this journey with us was rather difficult. It took us years. Until 4 years ago, products of pharmacological quality with a standardized active ingredient content meeting safety and quality criteria were not available in our country. And as I mentioned before, different magistral formulations, depending on the region, were prescribed by a very few medical doctors. Cannabis can do a lot, but it's not a miracle cure. These are the words of a pharmacist called Manfred Fankhauser, the best known expert in this field in Switzerland. We knew from the media and from other families with children with Dravet syndrome that CBD could help reducing the tonic-clonic seizures, in this case of our son. And we also knew that, as any other anti-epileptic drugs, CBD could have side effects like loss of appetite, diarrhea, fever, fatigue, or vomiting. But of course, we hoped they would not appear. Eventually, in 2018, our son's physician had found a CBD compound with a high enough pharmacological quality that she would prescribe for our son. After the approval from the health insurance that the medication would be covered, we could start in summer 2019. Although he effectively had fewer seizures during these months, he lost too many kilos. He practically didn't eat anymore when we arrived at the target dose. This is why we had to stop our CBD project. It might have been different with a different product. We will never know. In recent years, the demand for medical treatments with cannabis has risen sharply. Many governments have recognized the importance of cannabis in medicine, and laws have been changed, fortunately. And just a few months ago, in early 2021, the first CBD drug, Epidiolex, was finally approved by the Swiss health authorities for the two conditions, Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. That was 7 years after the FDA approved it in the US. The conditions and the access to CBD have never been better than today, at least not in Switzerland. I encourage any other parent to try if CBD could be beneficial for their child. And don't wait too long. And I would advise any healthcare professional to encourage families to try CBD, and the sooner the better. It is not a miracle drug, but CBD could have a huge impact on quality of life of their patients. And last, I believe that more clinical trials, also for other conditions, need to be done to get a real solid scientific basis. So thank you for listening to our story.
So thank you, Dedi and Renata, for your insightful talks. I am now pleased to also welcome Terry O'Regan with us for a short panel discussion. Let's start with you, Renata. Do you think CBD is recognized as adjunctive therapy by the parents of patients with Dravet syndrome? What are the main concerns and opportunities being discussed?
I would say CBD is very much recognized as an adjunctive therapy among us parents. And I cannot feel any concerns and also not talking about stigmatism or anything. In the contrary, as a so-called natural product, CBD is more appealing to many parents than the synthetic chemical molecules, where severe side effects have to be expected. And I see it's very positive.
Thank you, Renata. Terry, in this science-driven market, what are the key trends we see today influencing CBD in medical use?
There's a number of key trends, and I think they're both significant as well as encouraging. When we look at clinicaltrials.gov or trialsearch.who, we see that there is over 700 registered clinical trials looking at the role of CBD and other cannabinoids in chronic diseases of high unmet need, such as Alzheimer's, epilepsy, pain, cancer, neuropathy, etc. And this is a clear indicator for me of the medical community's interest in these molecules. We're also seeing CBD and THC products going through rigorous phase 3 studies, demonstrating clinical benefit, passing the evidence test, and gaining FDA and EMA MA approval, marketing authorization, and being used in a number of markets. Currently, I think there is about 4 approved products that have gone through these regulatory pathways and got approval. World-renowned leaders and academic institutions are getting involved in cannabinoid research, which is another key trend that I'm seeing, to help us better understand the endocannabinoid system, as well as the possible cannabinoid targets for treating diseases that are of high unmet need. And also we are seeing an increase in the number of academic and published papers. I think there's over 3,000 published papers out there basically highlighting the benefit of these drugs in some major diseases of the world. And lastly, the medical trend is running parallel with the increased enthusiasm we are seeing from consumers looking for natural plant-based solutions, such as CBD, to treat a number of ailments and conditions. And this is backed by top athletes and ambassadors that are endorsing CBD as an effective treatment for a range of medical conditions. So these trends are indicative for me of the scientific, medical, and public change in perception of these molecules and the enormous value that they can add to clinical practice.
Thank you, Terry. Very exciting times indeed for CBD nowadays. Back to you, Renata. With the scientific evidence we see today, what do you believe is still missing when it comes to CBD as an adjunctive therapy in the patients with the Dravet syndrome and even beyond?
When I look back at our own story, I think for lots of physicians, there is not enough basis. There's not enough studies that have been done. So I think the scientific community must invest on a number of more numbers of trials and studies to convince these healthcare professionals. It shouldn't be the patients, us, that have to convince the physicians, right? So it's probably not enough that we have this in our case of in Dravet syndrome to have this the phase 2 and 3 trials of the Epidiolex, which has gone through approval. There must be more, and also more conditions and more epileptic syndromes, trials and have more brands and have just a wider basis of of this evidence.
Yeah, and a wider portfolio of products for sure. So Terry, a last question to you to close this discussion. How do you see the future innovation of CBD when we talk about the medical use specifically, and looking at three different dimensions? On the one side, the science of the treatment, then the science of the technologies, and also the science of the expectant patient.
Sure. Well, I see all three of these channels pioneering new opportunities for patients, and it's hugely exciting for me, being relatively new to this industry. When we look at the science, there are a number of exciting avenues that are being pursued in major diseases, as I said already, sort of Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, autism, COVID-19, to name but a few. And these areas are areas of high unmet need. And I often think about the pure joy for patients, just what Renata has been saying, when we as a medical community step up and provide the evidence and treatment options for these patients in some of these devastating diseases. Brains Bioceutical is committed to this vision, and we as a relatively small company have already participated in over 15 clinical trials, including a phase 3 study for epilepsy, and we've recently got an NIH-sponsored study by a major US institution in one of these chronic diseases. And in other areas, we're looking at COVID-19, muscle inflammation, and other disease areas. Secondly, we spoke about technology, and I think there's a number of new technological advances that are being pursued, such as techniques to increase the bioavailability of cannabinoids with lipid technology, to pioneering and novel delivery mechanisms, for example, injectables and injectable formulations that will help us to have targeted benefits where it is most needed. And I think these advances could improve on the results, the impressive results that we're already seeing in clinical practice. As and then as the sort of the knowledge is increasing around cannabinoids and their use, what we are seeing is that the public expectations is rising for the use of these products. Almost every month, to Renata's testimony that she gave and the story that she shared, almost every month there is a similar story, some news story of a patient or a parent fighting the red tape in the healthcare system to make these cannabinoids available for patients. But we do see the demand is there, and I believe that we as an industry and as a research community, we need to listen to these stories and listen to these voices, and we need to provide the evidence that these desperate patients need in order to get access to these drugs. So I do believe these are exciting times, and this is truly a new medical frontier for us, which is very exciting.
Thank you so much, Terry, for these very exciting closing words. And thank you all for joining today's session and for your interest in this greater, exciting area of research. It was really a pleasure having you join us. And if you have any questions or need advice, please don't hesitate to get in touch via the link shown on this slide, and stay tuned for the next session of this educational webinar series. I wish you a nice rest of the day. Thank you.